Hello everyone, welcome to the Casecracker Stories. I am Jason. A twisted serial killer earned the moniker the Bone Crusher due to his sadistic urges, but a young victim, just moments before death arrived, thwarted him and prevented the emergence of more victims. This is the Baraboo Bone Crusher serial killer case in the United States. Early morning, July 10th, 1994, in the small town of Baraboo, Wisconsin, USA, an angling enthusiast walked down a woodland path to the banks of the Wisconsin River and began scouting for a suitable fishing spot. After advancing a short distance along the riverbank, he suddenly noticed something wrong in the water. Stopping to look closely at a piece of driftwood floating in the water, he gasped in horror. He saw a youth with completely bloodless skin. Most of the body was submerged underwater, the clothes caught on tree branches, swaying continuously with the current of the river. The police arrived shortly after and quickly identified the deceased. It was 14-year-old Chris Steiner, a missing person whom law enforcement had been actively searching for. Just a week prior, on July 4th, Chris's parents woke up to find their son was not in his bedroom. After searching the entire house, there was no sign of him. Consequently, they chose to report it to the police. The initial theory of the police was that the child might have had a conflict with his parents and run away from home. However, with a hole found in the screen door and muddy footprints discovered on the carpet inside the house, this theory was quickly disproven. It was evident that Chris had been taken by an intruder. At that time, no one could have imagined that the boy would be found in such a tragic manner. Although the forensic pathologist determined the boy died of drowning, they could not ascertain whether he accidentally fell into the water or was pushed into the river. As a result, the police listed the cause of death as undetermined. Although Chris's parents later conducted their own canvassing and investigation, learning vaguely that a local youth who frequently bullied others was highly suspicious, the police did not pay particular attention to this lead. The investigation ground to a complete halt a few months later, and this left another boy, 1 year later, to face a traumatic ordeal that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Late in the night, on July 29, 1995, a 13-year-old boy named Thad Phillips curled up on his living room couch, watching television. His family had just moved to the city not long ago. Thad had not made any close friends yet, which left him feeling somewhat isolated, relying on the TV to alleviate his boredom and distress. Understanding their son's internal struggle, his parents did not press him to go to bed. By the time the clock passed 11 p.m., Thad was exhausted. The audio from the television set began to sound like a lullaby. He thought about turning off the TV and heading to bed, but his eyelids grew heavy, and he drifted off to sleep. In the middle of his sleep, Thad half-consciously felt someone picking him up and carrying him away. However, because his father had previously carried him to bed after he fell asleep watching TV, he did not sense any danger. It was not until he was placed onto the cold ground and a sudden gust of night wind jarred him awake that Thad realized something was wrong. Opening his eyes, he was shocked to discover a young man standing before him who appeared to be only a few years older than himself, yet possessed an unusually powerful build. The individual showed no immediate hostility. He introduced himself as Joe, then sat down right next to Thad. In a friendly manner, he stated that he was fixing up a cool sports car back at his house and needed an extra pair of hands. His house was only half a mile away, and he asked Thad if he would be willing to come along. If the person had been a suspicious-looking adult, Thad might have screamed for help right then and there. But because the invitation came from a guy who seemed cool and possessed a reasonably friendly demeanor, Thad, who was desperate for companionship, agreed as if under a spell. But after following the suspect for a few hundred meters and actually arriving at and entering that highly dilapidated, massive house, Thad began to realize something was seriously wrong. The house was completely dilapidated. It did not look like a respectable residence. It looked more like an abandoned property used by squatters. Furthermore, after entering the house, Joe stopped mentioning the car repairs entirely. Instead, he insisted on inviting Thad up to the second floor. He claimed he kept them on the second floor, a collection of rare model cars. He wanted his new friend to take a look. He also mentioned that a few other friends would arrive shortly to host a party together. By this point, Thad was on high alert, but having already entered the suspect's residence, he could not refuse immediately. He had no choice but to follow the man to the second floor. Upon entering Joe's room, the suspect did produce a collection of model cars, along with pop records to share with Thad. This caused Thad to lower his guard once again. He even began to think that Joe was actually a decent person. But very quickly, the situation took a sharp downward turn. One moment Joe was laughing and talking with Thad. The next, his expression turned hostile as he approached. Hurling profanities, he reached his hand toward Thad's face. This time, Thad did not hesitate. The individual was undeniably dangerous. "Goodbye, I'm going home." As Thad turned around, he uttered these words in what was almost a shriek. He then attempted to flee the room. However, by this time, he had already fallen into a meticulously prepared trap. Joe lunged forward in a single bound and shoved Thad to the ground. Joe then grabbed Thad's left ankle and twisted it violently with both hands. Thad felt a piercing, agonizing pain. The massive surge of adrenaline triggered by the pain allowed him to break free from the perpetrator's grip instantly. He scrambled up and rushed out of the room, but after taking only 2 steps, an excruciating pain from his ankle nearly caused him to black out. Then came the horrific sensation of displaced bones grinding against each other. This made Thad realize that with a single, effortless twist, the suspect had broken his ankle bone. After limping down the stairs in a desperate escape attempt, he was recaptured by Joe. He was then shoved down onto the living room sofa. By this point, Joe was tormented by agonizing pain and terror, tears streaming down his face. He could only beg for mercy, pleading to be allowed to go home. He promised that he would not breathe a single word of tonight's events to his parents. He would claim his broken ankle was from tripping over a table, but Joe merely responded with a sneer. "Do you think I'm an idiot?" Then, he resumed the assault on Thad. When Thad desperately asked, "Why are you doing this to me?" the question hung in the air. Joe's answer was simple. "Because I like the sound and feel of bones snapping." As soon as the words left his mouth, he expertly grabbed Thad's remaining intact leg. He lifted it to a specific angle, then used his full body weight to crush down on it. A sharp crack echoed through the room. Thad's femur snapped. The femur is a critical piece of anatomy. It is the thickest and strongest bone in the human body. Under normal circumstances, it requires extreme trauma to fracture, such as falling from a height or being struck by a motor vehicle. This underscores the sheer brutality of Joe's assault. It also indicates he had likely planned and tested this method extensively to satisfy his sadistic fetish. The fracturing of this specific bone causes catastrophic trauma to the human body. After an initial second of pure shock, Thad broke into a profuse cold sweat. The pain breached his physical tolerance limits, leaving him unable to even scream. He could only dry heave in agony. Observing the agonizing state of his prey, Joe appeared intensely gratified. His demeanor visibly improved. He lifted Thad off the sofa and carried him back upstairs to the bedroom. He chatted and laughed as if he were tending to a sick friend. Once inside the room, he opened a drawer. It was packed with elastic bandages and white cotton socks. Mimicking a medical professional, he began wrapping the socks and bandages layer by layer around Thad's leg, immobilizing the fractured limb. The fracture site was secured. Then he spoke in a deceptively gentle tone. "Don't worry, aside from breaking bones, my other hobby is watching how they heal. That way, I can just break them again." His words left Thad trembling with fear. But driven by pure survival instinct, his mind was racing. Seizing on the perpetrator's good mood, Thad made a tentative request. To prevent his parents from panicking and launching a search, he asked if he could call home, intending to tell them he was spending the night at a friend's house. Unexpectedly, Joe actually agreed. He returned shortly with a telephone and placed it in front of the boy. This catch caught Thad off guard. As he picked up the receiver, his mind worked furiously, trying to figure out how to dial out and, without alerting the monster standing right in front of him, convey to his parents that he was being held captive and tortured. But when he held the receiver to his ear, there was no sound, not even the standard dial tone of a landline. Looking closer, he saw the phone cord nearby had been severed. Seeing the shock and despair on Thad's face, Joe burst into laughter, like a cat toying with its prey. He mocked him. "Did you really think I was that easy to fool?" Next, he produced a crudely made splint and ordered Thad to strap it to his broken leg to see if he could walk with the support. The boy was treated as nothing more than a test subject for his amusement. Whenever Thad collapsed to the ground, Joe would rush over and stomp on the boy's fractured leg for entertainment. In this manner, the first night of horror passed. Early the next morning, Thad's parents realized he was missing from the house and immediately called the police. However, the law enforcement personnel on the line dismissed their concerns, stating flatly that the boy had likely snuck out to hang out at a friend's house and would probably return shortly. But Thad's parents refused to accept this explanation. The family had just relocated to the area, and their son had not made any close friends yet, let alone anyone he would stay overnight with. So they drove around the nearby streets searching on their own. They even went to the town market, but there was no sign of Thad anywhere. At the time, they had no way of knowing. Their son was in a house less than half a mile from home, subjected to brutal, inhumane torture. By this point, Thad had become Joe's punching bag. That morning, Joe was in the garage, trying to fix a nearly totaled car. Because the repairs were going badly, he stormed upstairs in a rage. He beat and kicked Thad, who was lying in bed recovering from his injuries, shattering one of his kneecaps. Then, in a frenzy, he jumped into the air, landing with both feet on the boy's chest, snapping several ribs. Only then was his rage fully spent. Afterward, this volatile monster reverted back to the role of a kind older brother. He carried Thad downstairs, lying on the couch with him to watch movies and talk, as if all the previous acts of cruelty had been committed by someone else entirely. During this conversation, Joe talked about his family, his friends, his car, and his girlfriend. He even confessed Thad was not the first person he had abducted and brought to this house. There were 2 boys before him, but they were already dead. This conversation forced Thad to abandon the illusion that compliance would save his life. He no longer believed he would be released if he just cooperated. He realized he either had to find a way to escape, or he would be murdered by the psychopath standing before him. Thad began noting every detail of the house, looking for anything that could help him escape. He soon noticed something. While he was locked in the room, Joe's voice could occasionally be heard from downstairs, but there was no third person in the house. Just the 2 of them. After a moment of thought, Thad deduced a theory. Aside from the landline Joe had cut to taunt him, there had to be another working telephone. There must be a second line available. If he could locate it, he could call for help. That opportunity presented itself sooner than expected. It was during that afternoon. Joe left the house. Thad dragged his broken body out of bed. Using only his hands, he attempted to crawl downstairs. With every inch he moved, the pain intensified. The fractured bones in his legs and chest grated against each other like rusty blades. The jagged edges ground directly into his surrounding tissue and internal organs. The descent down the stairs was the most brutal part. With nearly every step he took, the agonizing pain forced him into unconsciousness. Each time he blacked out, the sheer agony woke him back up. He grit his teeth and continued to push forward through pure survival instinct. The grueling effort cost him critical time. By the time he reached the kitchen, gasping for air and covered in tears, the front door opened. The sound of footsteps echoed through the house. Joe had returned, and he wasn't alone. His girlfriend was with him. Thad realized his window of escape had closed. At this point, any sudden noise would give away his position. Left with no choice, he let out a silent sigh of despair. He lay motionless on the cold kitchen floor, waiting. Joe and his girlfriend spent some time on the living room sofa before he finally escorted her out. After locking the front door, Joe walked back inside. That was when he discovered Thad lying on the kitchen floor. What followed was another predictable round of physical violence. The assault further aggravated Thad's existing fractures. Joe dragged the boy back upstairs to the bedroom. He then delivered an explicit ultimatum. If Thad attempted to escape again, Joe promised to finish the job. By the following morning, Thad's condition had severely deteriorated. Both of his legs were heavily swollen, resembling bloated leather spheres. A severe fever had also set in. At that moment, the victim was unaware of his grim reality. His life was rapidly ticking away. Because the fractured bones remained unset, they continuously lacerated the surrounding tissue, compounded by the internal injuries from the repeated beatings. His body was failing. He was suffering from massive internal bleeding and systemic inflammation. Without immediate medical intervention, total organ failure would claim his life within hours. Fortune shifted slightly when Joe had to leave the house again on urgent business. To ensure Thad remained contained, Joe resorted to his usual tactics. He repeated his death threats while forcing the boy into a bedroom closet. Joe then locked the closet door from the outside, but Thad had reached a breaking point. He was ready to risk everything for one final attempt at survival. He knew this was his last chance. The physical constraints of the closet would not stop him. His adrenaline began to counter the debilitating pain. Every breath was labored, but his resolve remained fixed. The perpetrator believed the lock would hold the victim in place. He underestimated the desperation of a dying boy. Thad began to manipulate the mechanism, fully prepared for the consequences of failure. Once he heard Joe leave, he began fumbling around in the pitch-black closet. He quickly located a dust-covered electric guitar in the corner. Although he knew full well that once he took the next step, there would be no turning back. It was either rescue or a fatal beating. Thad did not hesitate for a second. He swung the guitar and smashed open the closet door in a few blows. He then followed the exact same path from the previous day, crawling downstairs using only his hands, blacking out from the pain multiple times along the way. He finally made it back to the kitchen. After dragging himself a bit further, he spotted a telephone mounted on the wall. Fortunately for him, the receiver cord was exceptionally long. Lying on the floor, Thad was able to reach out and grab it. With a slight tug, he pulled the receiver down. Even more critical, the keypad was built into the receiver itself. This meant he did not have to stand up to dial. Without hesitation, he dialed 911. Despite enduring torture beyond human tolerance and carrying injuries severe enough to be fatal, Thad still maintained basic composure and politeness. When the dispatcher heard his calm and polite tone detailing the situation, they initially dismissed it as a child's prank. But due to his parents' persistence, Thad's name had already been logged in the missing persons database. No matter how much the police suspected a prank, protocol required them to dispatch and verify. When asked for the location, Thad could not provide the exact address, but he gave a highly precise description of the house's exterior and its direction relative to his own home. The suspect was already a known local troublemaker. The responding officers recognized the description immediately. They arrived at the scene within minutes. Hearing Thad's cries for help from inside the house, they breached the door, finally rescuing the boy who had been trapped for over 40 hours. Upon arrival at the hospital, the medical staff was stunned by the severity of his trauma. He had 4 compound fractures in his legs. One foot had been completely twisted backward. Several toes were broken and bent in different directions. His skin resembled a sheet of deep purple rubber. Doctors later informed Thad's parents that if the boy had been found just 2 hours later, he could have been dead. Fortunately, after emergency medical intervention, Thad was out of immediate danger. At the same time, the young man who kidnapped him was arrested by police in a bar. His full name was Joe Clark. He was only 18 years old at the time. Facing police interrogation, he readily admitted that he had indeed kidnapped Thad. However, he claimed his motive was simply to make a friend and hang out with Thad. Regarding the horrific trauma on the boy's body, he flatly denied it, stating he had never laid a finger on Thad. He speculated that those injuries might have been caused by Thad accidentally falling when he passed out. Naturally, regarding these defenses, investigators did not believe a single word. Soon, charges were filed against him for first-degree attempted intentional homicide, inflicting severe bodily injury on a child, among other counts. Meanwhile, Thad did not just wait for justice from his hospital bed. As soon as he regained consciousness from emergency surgery, he grabbed his father's hand and said that during his abduction, he had heard Joe personally admit to killing 2 boys previously. The name of one was unknown, but the other child's name sounded like Chris something. Thad's father immediately fetched a phone book and read out the names matching Chris one by one. When he read Chris Steiner, Thad immediately stated that it was definitely the name, and this Chris Steiner was the boy mentioned at the beginning of the video who had drowned in the river. Upon learning this information, police immediately exhumed Chris's body from the grave for a second autopsy. This time, using x-rays, they confirmed that both of Chris's legs were also severely fractured. The manner in which his leg bones were broken, as well as the location, was almost identical to the trauma found on Thad. From this, investigators concluded that 1 year prior, Chris had also been kidnapped by Joe and was subsequently tortured for an entire week. After that, he was thrown into the Wisconsin River by Joe. With both legs broken, he was unable to swim. In the end, he drowned. Consequently, the police charged Joe with murder. The first case to enter the trial phase was the kidnapping and assault of Thad. Although Joe, in the courtroom, attempted to exculpate himself on the grounds of mental illness, and his defense attorney argued that Joe's biological mother abused drugs heavily during pregnancy, affecting his brain development, and that he had suffered a head injury in a bicycle accident the previous year, rendering him unable to control his behavior most of the time. When Thad himself took the witness stand and recounted his horrific ordeal in a young but brave voice, and when he rolled up his pant legs and shirt to display the terrifying, permanent scars on his body, all of Joe's excuses became utterly absurd. Ultimately, he was sentenced to 100 years in prison and ordered to pay $21 million in restitution to Thad. This verdict later raised questions from many people. While the 100-year sentence was not an issue, Joe was only 18 years old and had no assets under his name, meaning it was virtually impossible for him to pay this restitution. The presiding judge later explained that he took into account the possibility that this case might be adapted into a book in the future, or even made into a movie, meaning the killer, Joe, could receive royalties. If that were to happen, every single cent of that money would be paid to Thad. However, at that time, Thad's primary concern was not whether he would receive this restitution in the future, but rather seeking justice for the other murdered boy. The prosecution, determined to prevent a dangerous individual like Joe from ever returning to society on parole, was completely aligned with Thad's goal. Shortly after, they filed for another trial to prosecute the murder of Chris. Thad volunteered to take the witness stand once again. Yet shortly before the trial commenced, another heinous crime was committed against Thad. As a local delinquent, Joe possessed a group of fiercely loyal young followers. Even after his arrest, the rest of the group scattered and fled. However, a 15-year-old boy named Michael Hupsch remained fiercely loyal to this so-called boss. Naturally, he viewed Thad, the one who caused his arrest, as an enemy. One day, he stole his father's gun and fired 2 shots directly into Thad's back. Our young hero, Thad, proved incredibly resilient. Though he collapsed with severe injuries, his life was saved once again through emergency medical intervention. Following his recovery, he acted as a key witness, taking the stand once more during the trial. As a result, Joe was sentenced to another 100 years in prison. This time, the prosecution introduced a new piece of evidence: Joe's personal diary. It contained the names of 29 boys, all children from the local neighborhood or schools. Next to the names of these boys, he categorized them into 3 distinct lists. They were labeled Get to Know Better, Can Wait a While, and Leg Processing. Using this list, the prosecution proved that inside Joe's mind, a sadistic serial killer was developing, posing a catastrophic threat to society. Therefore, this sentence carried an additional condition of no parole. The killer, later dubbed the Bone Crusher of Baraboo, was finally locked away forever. It can be said that it was Thad, relying on his own courage, who saved countless potential victims. He was a young hero in every sense of the word. In stark contrast to him was Michael, the 15-year-old boy who shot Thad out of a desire to avenge Joe. Because of his young age at the time, he escaped the harshest legal punishment. However, 22 years later, in 2018, at age 37, he was convicted of assaulting a 15-year-old girl and sentenced to 12 years in prison. Ultimately, he destroyed his own life. Later, after enduring a series of painful surgical procedures, Thad finally recovered from injuries that had left him nearly paralyzed. As an adult, he married and had children, building a quiet, happy life. Today, aside from a slight limp when he walks, he appears physically indistinguishable from anyone else. However, during an interview 2 years ago, the public eventually learned the truth. 3 decades had passed. That $21 million settlement. He never received a single cent of it. Instead, repeated surgeries and subsequent expensive treatments had already pushed his family to the brink of financial ruin. Once concerned citizens learned of his situation, they set up a crowdfunding page for him, hoping this resilient survivor, who had cheated death multiple times, would not ultimately fall below that cruel, lethal line. That concludes today's case brief. Once again, thank you all very much for your support and encouragement. We will see you in the next report.